So I think this is an interesting one. How do you get the player to accept loss? A lot of times in your storytelling, you want the player to have a setback or to lose a combat or to otherwise get into a situation that they cannot successfully get out of. And then you put them into the situation of recovering from that loss, and it makes for better storytelling. The player has to pick themselves up from the ground and keep going. But the problem is that decades of video games have trained most players that they shouldn't expect to lose. That if they are losing, it's because they are doing something wrong, because they have made a mistake, or they have otherwise done something that if they reload their save game and try again, that they might be able to do better and succeed and get past this point. So when you put a player in this situation where the outcome is an expectation of loss, how do you get the player to accept that loss? Dragon Age Origins has a famous example of this. As you get towards the end of the game, there is a combat that the expectation is that you won't win. And if you don't win, you get taken prisoner, and there are a bunch of different potential cutscenes that play as you are broken out of prison. And that's some great content. I actually think that content is far superior to the content that plays if you actually win that combat. But tons of players never ever actually see that content, because as they start to lose that combat, they reload before they even die, before they even lose. So they don't even realize that they will survive that loss. They don't even let the combat get that far before they abort out of their attempt and try again, pounding their head against the wall until they finally figure out how to actually win, or they give up. What do you do? One option is to take a page from what gets done in exploration. Typically, if you have jumping, what you will do is you will have heights or distances that are disallowed in your level design. So if I can jump 2 meters, you will have things that are 1.5 meters apart, and you will have things that are 3 or 4 meters apart. But you won't have anything that's 2.1 meters apart or 2.4 meters apart, because that lives in a world of confusion where the player might think that they can make that jump if they just try enough times. To avoid that confusion, what you do is you essentially remove a chunk of content from that middle space, that confusing space. So in the case of getting a player to accept loss, then what you would do is make this situation so clearly beyond their ability to deal with that they lose very quickly. But that's not super satisfying either, because then the player almost treats it like a cutscene. They come in, the combat starts, they're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by super mechs, and they go, okay, well, whatever, I'll just sit here and let the story continue. While that is a solution that allows that loss to occur, and certainly it is a solution that is used, I don't feel like it's the most satisfying solution, because it doesn't have the player actually having any agency in the moment. What you were probably going for from a storytelling perspective was for the player to try and to fail and to feel that failure before they moved on and picked up the pieces. If the clarity is too strong, if the gap is too wide, there's no attempt made. There's no feeling of failure if they're just overwhelmed by an obviously superior force. So you actually want the ambiguity, you just want the player to keep moving forward. Now, some games have gotten around this by having there basically be no save game, where there's one continuous state of game that always moves forward. If you imagine Pokemon, for example, basically they work that way. You move forward, if you lose, you respawn at the nearest Pokestop, and you keep going forward. I really like this solution because it's not so much that the player has to accept loss so much as they have no other choice. There is only one path forward. There is no reload. Now, there are a lot of pitfalls and problems with this as a solution for a lot of games. It means that everything that the player does becomes so much more impactful. Every choice they make, every branch they take becomes irreversible because they have no save game to go back and try a different path. Paradoxically, it essentially has the opposite effect to combat, because every combat is survivable. If you lose a Poke Battle, you go back to the Pokestop and you keep going. There's a consequence, but that consequence isn't a game over. And then finally, it also means that that one save game you have better never have any problems in it. If you have a quest logic problem, the player doesn't have a repository of save games to go back to work around that bug, because there's just the one save game. Honestly, one of the things that has prevented me from exploring this feature in particular is the fear of an undiscovered bug escaping into the wild and making the game completely unfinishable to a significant percentage of the players. So it's not a solution for all situations. A third way would be preparing the player for loss. So maybe you can get them used to the concept of there being situations that they are not going to be able to get through, and to allow the game to continue forward. You might be able to do this by starting with the unjumpable gap and then slowly narrowing that gap and then training the player to accept loss as you go. But that's also going to require the game to put this sort of situation in front of the player fairly commonly. And likely, from a storytelling perspective, you're only looking to do this once or twice, which doesn't give you a ton of opportunity to train the player, does it? But other than those, I don't know that I have a really good answer in how you get the player to accept a loss in your narrative. So let me know down in the comments if you've played a game that did this really well. Or if you are a game dev, how did you try to get the player to accept a loss in the course of your game? A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link down in the description. If you found this video interesting or informative, give it a thumbs up, because that will help YouTube know that it's worth sharing with other people. If you have other thoughts on this topic, a comment will probably be answered by me. I will see you again soon. Thank you.